Hello and welcome back to Let the Stone Speak. I'm Brent Nagtegaal, your host here in Jerusalem, Israel. Earlier today, I interviewed Zvi Koenisgberg. He is a historian and the author of this book, The Lost Temple of Israel. And he's just a really interesting figure because he's seen a lot in the archaeological world here in Israel going back decades. He was very instrumental in the excavation of Professor Adam Zertal of Joshua's altar on Mount Ebal. This is a discovery that was decades in the making that has come to the fore of late because of a curse inscription. That's right, a curse inscription that was found on the Mounts of Curse from the dump piles of the excavations of the altar there back in the 1980s. We've had a program about this with Scott Stripling, Dr. Scott Stripling, just recently, but I thought it would be good to go back and interview somebody that was there at the time and talk about the larger context behind the discovery of this curse amulet. He's also had a lot of history with Professor Benjamin Mazar, somebody that's very close to the Armstrong Institute. Really, he's the man that helped us start off our archaeological work back in Jerusalem, here in Jerusalem in 1969, and continued the partnership with him and his granddaughter, Dr. Eilat Mazar, before she died in 2021. So this is a man with a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, and just a really interesting personality as well. In terms of how he can view the biblical archaeological world, the debate of the historicity of the Bible, even going back, and how long it takes sometimes for actual archaeological discoveries that are consistent with the Bible, how long it takes for them to actually be deemed as legitimate by the archaeological community. So I hope you enjoy this wonderful interview with Zvi Koenisgberg. Goes for about half an hour. I also wanted to just mention, this is our magazine where we covered Joshua's altar. This was from last year. While you can't get a hard copy of this, you can download the PDF. We have a couple of articles featuring the discovery of the altar and how it came about with Professor Zertal inside this magazine. And so you can go to our website, armstronginstitute.org, and you can hit the literature tab there, or the publications tab, and you'll find a place where you can get to this magazine. So thank you very much for listening to the program, and I hope you enjoy it with Zvi Koenisgberg. Hello, Zvi. Thank you very much for coming on Let the Stone Speak.
Hello, Brent. I'm very happy to be here.
I've wanted to talk to you for some time. I only just met you personally, I guess, last week, but we've corresponded a little bit in the past, particularly to do with your history with Professor Adam Zertal and the discovery of the altar back in the 80s on Mount Ebal. And people would be familiar with this. 3 weeks ago, I interviewed Dr. Scott Stripling about the amulet or the curse tablet and all the brouhaha that is taken off once a scientific study came out about that. I want to put that to the side a little bit with you, if I can, because your history is a bit richer in how it goes back to the actual discovery of the location, on the mountain of curse, and with Professor Zertal, who's no longer with us. So perhaps you can speak a little bit at first about your history with Professor Zertal and how you became involved with the Mount Ebal altar site.
Okay. The beginning was December 1981 when I was asked to pick up an archaeologist I lived in a town called Shechem, and I was asked to pick up an archaeologist who would be teaching the guides of our field school about the area. So at 5 a.m. on a nice morning in December of 1981, I show up at the dining room of Kibbutz Ein Shemer, and I'm greeted by a gentleman with a very broad, friendly smile, and a set of crutches right next to him. And I could never equate that smile with those crutches, but they were his, because he had been wounded badly in the Yom Kippur War, and had been using them and used them for the rest of his life, actually, and decided, strangely enough, after a period of hospitalization, to retrain and become an archaeologist, and professors came to his bed. for the first year or so, and then he decided to, as his first master and then doctoral project, to do a survey of the area, of the tribal area of Manasseh,
Okay.
which is 3,000 square kilometers, walk up and down the hills of Samaria on crutches from 1977 until 2015.
Wow.
If you want a definition of bravery,
Yeah.
there you have it.
So for people that are a bit unaware, maybe you can just describe what a survey is.
Okay, a survey is a means for understanding who lived, how, where, when. Now, how do we do that? You go physically walking over an entire area, every square foot or yard or meter, whatever you use, and you look for signs of yesteryear. Now, buildings you find rarely, because even ancient buildings, usually the stones are taken away for secondary use over the years. But what always remains is pottery. Easy to make, easy to break, always stays on site.
Right.
You go to hill X and you look for, pick up 100 pieces, 20% from period A, 30% from period B, etc., etc. And then you get a map of who lived where, when, and how, which is great for doing any kind of research relating to the history of a particular area.
Right.
And he divided them into between 35 and 40 categories, every single site. And now Shai Bar, who worked with him and is completing the survey now that has been going on since 1977. It's, by the way, the most extensive archaeological survey anywhere in the world. And there will be 10 volumes containing 3,000 sites or so.
I think we have a number of the volumes already in this in the library here. In one of the early volumes, I think it might be volume number 1, actually, is the site.
Is the Ebal, right?
Is Mount Ebal. And so on this survey, Adam Zertal...
Well, he discovered this site. Now, there were 12 different sites of different periods in Mount Ebal. This is the only one that is Iron 1 or LB. And the nearest one, time-wise, is a farm just down the road from the Persian period, roughly 500 BC. So we're talking time difference of 700 years or so. And if there was a Joshua, and if he did whatever he did on Mount Ebal, it had to be this place. Because nothing else works from a time perspective.
You're saying he's done a survey everywhere, and as far as the pottery dating from the time of Joshua, this is the only location.
This is the only one. Now, he came to this site, and what he found was a large pile of stones, which is not unusual because the farmers, to till the land, have to clear the stones away. Big rocks. But there were walls jutting out in different places, and literally tons of pottery. The interesting thing about this pottery is that it was almost all Iron 1. There was very little, less than 3% from LB, nothing later.
And so, you know, for our audience, Iron 1 dates
is the settlement period, theoretically. And he had found up to then also many sites of the settlement period, beginning at the Jordan River and working their way up towards Shechem in a east to west direction, which is what the Bible talks about. And he wanted to excavate. He had not yet completed his doctorate then, but I happened to have been mayor of this little town that I lived in, and I could help him with logistics, because in his spare time he used to milk the cows in the kibbutz. So he really didn't run after collecting money to do any excavations, and nobody would have cared anyhow. And then you have the problematics of West Bank politics, etc. And we, in that dining room, within 2 minutes, became friends for life, literally. And he told me about the site, and I said, well, let's see what we can do. And we put together the logistics, and we started to work. Make a long story short, we got to the third season. It was October 1983, and we were beginning to see a building emerge, a structure beneath that pile of rocks. One day, we sat down in the middle of the excavation season. He drew a little drawing of what he thought the structure would look like
Based on the walls
based on the walls that were beginning to jut out beneath the pile of rocks. By the way, he stood there, every rock that was taken off the pile, he stood there and watched to make sure nobody's taking off anything.
That mistake happens often.
That took 3 seasons of excavation, that very careful work. And I saw the picture he was drawing, and I almost died, literally. And he describes it fabulously in his book. I ran to the library, brought him back a book, opened it up, same thing.
Right.
Same thing. I brought him what's known as the Mishnah, which is the first codification of Jewish law post-Bible, around 200 AD. And the picture was from the tractate of Midot, or measurements, which described the altar of the Second Temple. And you could look at his picture and look at this picture, and you see...
The altars look similar. Well, the buildings look
very similar. You know what, the crazy thing is that when he did a press conference announcing the discovery, he was lambasted in the worst way, just like the amulet was lambasted now. 40 years later now, everyone will tell you at least that it's a cultic site. No one will deny that anymore, if they're sane, which doesn't go along. That's another story. Anyhow, no, the opposition was crazy. Now, I took 2 very well-known professors, I won't use names, to the site. And at the same time, there were these Norwegian journalists there, and one of them had a drone, the early ages of drone, and he put it up. And one of the professors took a look at ground level. He said, I don't see anything. He took a look at the shot from the drone. He said, oh, this is unquestionably an altar. You can't mistake it for anything else. It's impossible. It's impossible. And yet, it was called a farmhouse. It was called a tower, which is already really idiotic because there's really nothing to see from there.
Right. It's not actually on the very top of Mount Ebal. It's on
even from the top of Mount Ebal, you don't have a good view of what's going on in the Jordan Valley, in the valley of Tirzah, beneath you. So a tower there would be insane, and a farmhouse would be insane. But the opposition to the discovery doesn't come from the rational world, because it comes from the imbued concept among many, many, many scholars that all of these stories are a pile of you-know-what.
And this was Zertal's position. He came from that school originally. Is that not right? Or you would know better than me?
I wouldn't say exactly he came from that school, but he came from a place where they would not have a problem eating pork on Yom Kippur, you know, the very important fast day. And so from completely a-religious, I went to, I could tell you, I think it's okay to talk about it, I went to his mother's funeral, she passed away, and it was like, it had no Jewish traditional symbols about it. It was just like something out of a communist playbook.
Right.
And they, until a certain period, they had a picture of Stalin in the dining room. I mean, so these were people who came from a different world.
In many ways, he is then, therefore, the perfect person to discover such a site. Somebody without a preconceived idea of what should be there, happens upon it based on what he sees.
Exactly right. And there was no justification in any of the comments that he was looking for this. He was not looking for this. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. There 4 archaeologists in the 19th century went up to Ebal, and they were specifically looking for this altar of Joshua, and they didn't find it. Now, I'm not saying that this is the altar of Joshua. I'm saying that if it did exist, it's this thing. Very simple, because there's no video of Joshua, you know, around. And even if there was, you read the New York Times, and you would think the Holocaust never happened because they barely mentioned it. So truth is a very fudgy area.
But like you say, I mean, the backlash was fast
and
furious at the time. You write in your book that there was one scholar, a prominent scholar, that was more open-minded as to the potential of this being, you know, what Zertal described
Yes,
it as.
that was Benjamin Mazar. Yes.
And one of the reasons we have you here, we're in Benjamin Mazar's library. We have his books here. You've brought a book from Benjamin Mazar to add to the library.
I'll tell you about Benjamin Mazar. The evening when we looked at the pictures, the whole camp of people in the excavation went nuts. Everybody was delirious because there was any minimal kind of objectivity could take a look at those two pictures and see that these are the same
It's a match.
So he called up Mazar, Adam, and he asked me to pick him up the next day. I'd never met Mazar in my life. So at 7 a.m., I'm at Barbanel Street, number 9. It's funny, I just met somebody this last Saturday, asked me, did you know Benjamin Mazar? And I said, listen, his phone number was 02639-845. You know, I'll never forget it in a million years. I mean, I haven't used it since early 1990s.
Right.
But number one, I have a good memory, and number two, everything about him I like to remember. So,
Who was he, first of all?
Benjamin Mazar. Well, first of all,
briefly,
he did two things. He did the excavation of the Western Wall after 1967, the Six-Day War, and he was president of the Hebrew University for a decade, and a very successful one at that. But I've heard from reliable people, especially another president of the Hebrew University, whom I know well, said he was the best ever.
Oh, okay.
So I knock on his door, he sits me down, have a cup of coffee. President of the Hebrew University, ex-president, is making me a cup of coffee and sitting me down. I told him, I'll do it. No, you're my guest. So we scuttle out to the car, and he's in his late 70s here, and he said, oh goodness, I forgot something. What did you forget? I forgot my Bible. Well, we have plenty of Bibles, it's okay. He said, I never go without this one. He goes back, gets a Bible, opens it up, and I understand why. It was a gift from his brother-in-law, Yitzhak ben Zvi, who was the second president of the State of Israel. He told me, Benjamin, that I never go to any site related to the Bible without this Bible. No way. So that was my introduction to Benjamin Mazar. And then I would go, he said, come over whenever you want, call me up, not a problem. I used to go over, he'd hand me a pile of books or a list of books to look up if he didn't have them at home. Go home, read, come back, we discuss. This went on for a decade. So this was my education, which is not bad.
Yeah, it's great.
A lot of people have said it doesn't get any better. And I think it doesn't, because he was open-minded to an amazing degree. And not to mention brilliant, I mean. So that was Benjamin Mazar for me.
And then, as far as he related to Adam Zertal and discovery of the altar, perhaps you can describe.
They were very tight. Now, understand one thing, to come out in his position and say, oh, this is exactly right, and all of that is almost impossible. Because they'd be running after him instead of running after Zertal to denounce him and all of that. But he said there's a lot of legitimacy. He gave Adam a lot of legitimacy, which he lacked.
Right.
Which he lacked, and it was very important. And it was important for Adam on a personal level also. Certainly that this, revered, brilliant guy thinks he's on the money. And then, a few years later, Adam did the University of Haifa did a show in the Heck Museum on the survey, and they had very nice lights lighting up for each period, different colors, very cute. And I had thought of something the night before. I'd been claiming for 40 years now that the Ebal site was actually a temple, and the object of the biblical phrase of the place that he, capital H, will choose, the home of God. And I told Mazar, and he said, maybe yes, maybe no. Just like I told Professor Haran, whose book I just donated back to the library, which belonged to Mazar. I was supposed to see him the next day, and I had a thought in the middle of the night, and I saw him the next day at this exhibit in Haifa, and I told him a story. He grabbed my arm, and his hand was shaking, and he said, "You have to write this up." Mm-hmm. What I told him was Genesis 48. Genesis 48 tells the story of Jacob about to die. Joseph brings his sons to be blessed, Manasseh and Ephraim. He sets them up very deliberately so that the right hand is above the elder son Manasseh, left above Ephraim. Jacob crosses his arms. 3,000 years people have been looking for an explanation why this happened. The day after the pictures, we were driving back to Jerusalem, and we passed by Shiloh. Mm-hmm. And I told Mazar, "Would you like to go in and take a look at what Finkelstein is doing?" And Finkelstein was there, excavating at the time. So he loved the opportunity because he didn't get out that much already, and it was a great thing, you know, just to be right there. So we stopped by, and I asked Finkelstein, those who don't know Finkelstein, Professor Israel Finkelstein, very well known for his especially theory of low chronology, but that's another long story. I asked Finkelstein, when did Shiloh begin to function as a central Israelite site? He said 1150 BC, which happens to be precisely the time that Zertal thinks that Ebal ceased to function, was deliberately covered up and abandoned. Mm-hmm. In other words, they piled it on, left, went to Shiloh. What does that mean? That means this. This probably never happened. It was written to explain the transfer of the central holy site of Israel from Mount Ebal in the tribe of Manasseh to Shiloh of Ephraim. Now, how do we know that that makes sense from another perspective? You go to the blessing of Judah, the most important son, you see, until the coming of Shiloh. In other words, Shiloh is an important function within the blessings of Jacob. So I might be right. But at least I convinced Professor Benjamin Mazar that
you might be onto something
at
as
the
well.
time, yes. So that was gratifying, to say the least.
And so Benjamin Mazar, and I mean, he didn't come out and state that the Ebal altar was definitely an altar.
And it really, in retrospect, I mean, you get a lot smarter when you get older. You know, you take a look back, and he couldn't have done it. It's way too revolutionary.
So, because what you're saying is, and I think, you know, some of these other scholars that looked at it and said, well, if it is what Adam Zertal says it is, then it kind of, we have to rethink our education in all these universities.
That's
about
what Larry Steger of Harvard, who headed the excavations in Ashkelon for many, many years, and he was a brilliant man, brilliant. I spoke to him a number of times. I was in Boston for many years, and I had the opportunity to speak to him often. And that's what he said, we have to go back to kindergarten. Mm-hmm. Now, I take it...
What does he mean by that?
I'll tell you what he means by that. Giving historical legitimacy to anything in the 5 books of Moses is very problematic from a scientific perspective to date. Mm-hmm. These things couldn't have happened. The texts were written hundreds of years later, or many hundreds of years later, depending upon all sorts of different thinking. But it's just not feasible. Not feasible. Now, my thinking on this is exactly the opposite. And I'll give you an example, if I may, from the amulet business that's been going on now.
Sure.
Okay, so the amulet has met with very serious opposition. Now, what they don't take into account is the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the Ebal site. Mm-hmm. Now, if you take a look at the Ebal site and call it anything else than what I describe it as, you have to explain why everything that I claim about it is not correct. The old temple aspects, the idea of Jacob crossing his arms, the fact that it lines up with the other footprint sites that Zertal discovered, it shrieks central cultic site, shriek central cultic site. But no one in the entire world of archaeology has come out and said anything very positive about the Ebal site. I'll give you an example, if I may, without naming names. A very prominent archaeologist gave a lecture which I attended, and they were talking about bones, and someone in the audience asked, well, what about the bones from Mount Ebal? And this person said, well, it's not even sure that this was a cultic site.
Yeah, just dismiss it.
This was a few years ago. Now, I took Yossi Garfinkel, who was until recently head of the archaeology department at Hebrew, to the site. He took a look at around 100 installations at Ebal. He said, this is a cultic site. There's no two ways about it. So how can one come to this conclusion, the other come to another conclusion? These things are beyond logic. It comes with the fact that people have their own, they're as religious and fundamentalist as the people in Mea Shearim, in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. Once you get an idea, it doesn't change. And intellectual honesty is something that I found is a very, very rare commodity in this world. And that's life. I mean, but from an objective perspective, I think, give you my take on this, this should be the paradigm from which everything else is judged. When I just looked at Professor Rolston, who's a very well-known epigrapher, a nice guy, intellectually fine, there's nothing wrong with him, but his whole critique completely ignored the issue of the site itself.
Right.
And if you take a look at the amulet and you think that it was done, or whatever it was, in this particular site, there has to be some significance to do it. And to just blast it to kingdom come really is intellectually questionable, to say the least.
Right. When you don't mix the archaeology with the epigraphy, you don't consider the context in which it was found, the location in which it was found as well, and you're just basing it on the writing, then...
Now, let's go back to Benjamin Mazar at this point. Benjamin Mazar told me at the beginning of my research many, many, many years ago, you'll never be able to do this in a university because you're crossing over too many disciplines, and people have their fixed ideas. Just go for it, man. That's what he told me in Hebrew. Ruth tells it. In very modern Hebrew, which he was not usually, not the kind of stuff he would use. His Hebrew was much more biblically oriented. But he loved it. He loved the idea and running with this concept. And a number of others, I don't want to name drop, but two very important scholars, one in the United States, one here, were assigned the task by the Council of Higher Learning here to examine all the curricula of Judaic and Israeli universities, and both of them think they might be on the money.
Right.
Which would, of course, change a lot of things, and primarily, not only the identification of Ebal as such, but I think that the biblical texts relating to Ebal had to have been written at the time of the occurrences, which means 600 years before science thinks they were written. Right. Which disrupts the whole kit and caboodle, because if you look at the opening page of Professor Alexander Rofe's introduction to Deuteronomy, you see he stresses the fact that source D, which contains the materials of Deuteronomy, is absolutely dated to the time of Josiah. We won't go into that. And all the rest of the sources relative to that. And if that crumbles, boom.
Yeah, so this is why the implications... And this is why I think people would fight so hard against it, because not only are you saying the events in Joshua have historical validity based on what was found, but also it has to do with the writing of the rest of the Bible as well, and how early we can push that dating back to.
That is exactly correct.
Yeah, well, I do think that as people, it's just interesting to me to see how long it took for people to accept that the altar itself was probably an altar, and perhaps, I hope we don't have to wait as long for the cursed tablet.
Well, I'll tell you something. I won't describe it at length, but there's a possibility that we will be finding more in the very near future.
Well, that's good. I mean, you live really close by to the location. Is that?
No, I live here.
Oh, you live here. Lived,
yeah.
Past. Sorry,
Yeah,
past
yes,
tense.
but
Yeah, you live around the corner. Sorry.
I know it well, and I go there often to the site.
Mm-hmm. You're yet to take us, so
Pardon?
yeah, you should.
We'll work it in
Yeah.
when things calm down a bit. And
Yeah.
are we on? We're still on camera, right?
Yeah.
Well, my grandson was just on a special ops unit in the area. He actually was on the mountain on top of Ebal, this army base, and they were there for a little while. There are bad things going on in the neighborhood there that we should not be talking about. So,
Okay. So we'll wait, Phil,
we'll wait.
another
Yes,
time to
yes.
visit the site.
No, I'll be there next week, but that's a bunch of crazy guys go up there. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got an excavation starting in a couple of weeks in Jerusalem, so I don't think we'll have.
In the Ophel.
Yes, back there. So,
very nice.
so we won't have too much time, but you'll have to come and visit as we're digging.
I intend to.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I will say you've written this book. This is, I guess, there's another version, updated version that is out.
Version. The only thing that's on sale now is the Kindle version on Amazon.
Okay. Well, we could definitely put that in the links to today's program. Is it the same title as the Lost
Temple of Israel?
Lost Temple of Israel.
There's only one.
This copy is very special. It's the one that you actually
gave a lot.
Gave a lot, and it has your inscription in there.
You know, she wrote me the nicest letter I have ever gotten in my life because of that. And not because of the scholarship, but because of the way I describe Benjamin and Adam. I sat with a lot at the wedding of Adam's youngest son. We sat at the same table. So we used to see each other once in a while, you know, here and there, and always very good relationship. I remember her coming with Benjamin a number of times to Ebal, and they used to, all the cars used to meet where I lived in Shechem at the time. They used to get out, and I think it was in the, I don't remember if she was in the army or if she was still in secondary school. But I knew her basically all her adult life.
Well, we're happy that we could take this interview here, where their libraries are set up, and we're happy that we could pick your brain.
No,
with
it's
some
my
of this.
pleasure, because anything to do with Benjamin or that Mazar, I'm very happy to talk about them.
Okay.
They deserve anything I can say about, any good things I can say about them. And those are the only things I would ever say about them.
Me as well, me as well. Thank you very much, Zvi.
My pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed that interview with Zvi Koenisgberg. Thank you very much for him for spending his time with us here today at the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology in Jerusalem. I did want to mention one more time our magazine. This one's about Joshua's altar itself. This is a back issue. But if you want to receive this magazine going forward, you can go to our website, armstronginstitute.org, and you can scroll down and find a place where you can request a free subscription to the magazine. It comes out 6 times per year, and your subscription will get you about 3 issues, I believe, and you can just then resubscribe absolutely free continuously, and you'll never have to pay for a subscription. This is a magazine where we focus on biblical archaeology and biblical history, and so it's really something that if you're interested in this subject, it's something that you would want to get to, because we just have some really interesting articles taking a lot of the publications, the scientific publications, and their discoveries, or discoveries written up there, and distilling them for the common man as best we can to make sense of what is being and has been discovered in the lands of the Bible. So please avail yourself of the magazine, and thank you very much for listening to this episode of Let the Stone Speak.